If you think you missed your shot at a full blooming balcony this year because spring came and went, I need to correct that right now. There is a second planting window almost every home gardener ignores, and it is happening in front of you this exact week. Late summer, right as July hands off to August, is not the leftover second best time to plant perennials in containers. In some real, measurable ways, it is better than spring. The soil in your pots is already warm, which means roots establish fast instead of sitting sluggish in cold spring dirt waiting to wake up. The air is starting to ease off its peak heat as we move toward fall, which means less stress on a newly planted root system than you'd think. And here's the detail almost nobody mentions. When you buy a perennial in late summer, you're buying a plant that is already showing you exactly what it looks like. Full color, true height, real bloom, instead of a bare stick in a pot with a photo on a plastic tag that may or may not match what you actually get. You are buying certainty instead of a gamble. Garden centers also know this stretch of the season is when perennial demand quietly drops, which means stock that's been sitting since spring often gets marked down to clear space for fall shipments. Cheaper plants, warmer soil, honest previews of what you're getting. That is not a consolation prize. That is an advantage spring shoppers do not get. 11 plants, small spaces only, and a completely honest breakdown of what you'll see this year versus what you're really investing in for next year. Let's go. Plant 1, Creeping Stonecrop. If you have ever killed a plant by simply forgetting it existed for 3 weeks, this is the one that forgives you for it. Sedum spurium, sold most often as dragon's blood, is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9, which means it survives winters that would wipe out almost anything else you'd try in a container. It's a low, mat-forming succulent that spreads by rooting itself wherever its trailing stems touch soil, so a single 4-inch nursery pot can fill the surface of a 14-inch container within 1 season. The foliage starts bright green in spring, deepens to bronze through summer, and turns a deep wine red by fall, so you're getting color even before the flowers show up. And the flowers do show up, clusters of small starry red-pink blooms that open from June through August. The reason this one earns a spot: it stores water in its own leaves, so mist waterings barely register. Plant it in a shallow, wide container with a gritty, fast-draining mix, full sun, and just leave it alone. That's the entire instruction manual. Tell me in the comments what you're growing on right now: a balcony, a fire escape, a porch rail, a windowsill. I want to know what we're actually working with here, because it changes which of these 11 plants I'd tell you to grab first. Plant 2, Ice Plant. Dilosperma cooperi is a South African succulent that was never built for a soft life, and that's exactly the point. It's rated for USDA zones 5 through 9, depending on the cultivar, and it does something most flowering plants can't. It blooms non-stop, from early summer, straight through the first hard frost. No rest period, no lull. The magenta, daisy-shaped flowers open every morning and close at night, so you get a living plant that visibly reacts to the day. It spreads by trailing, rooting stems that knit together into a dense mat, which in a pot means it will happily flow over the edge and down the side of the container, rather than staying politely inside the rim. The reason it belongs on a small space list specifically: it wants exactly what containers are bad at avoiding: heat and dryness. A pot that bakes on concrete all August, the kind of spot that kills most flowering annuals by mid-July, is this plant's favorite address. Give it a gritty mix, a saucer you can dump out after rain, and full sun, and treat it as one of the very few plants that gets better the more you neglect it. Plant 3, Threadleaf Coreopsis. Coreopsis verticillata, particularly the cultivars Zagreb and Moonbeam, is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9 and produces fine, needle-like foliage that stays airy and delicate even when the plant is absolutely covered in flowers. And it is covered. Gold for Zagreb, a softer lemon butter yellow for Moonbeam, blooming continuously from early summer through late summer, with a second flush in fall if you shear it back by half once the first round starts to thin out. It spreads by rhizome and by reseeding, so a single plant in a container will visibly bulk up its own root mass year over year, filling more of the pot each spring without you doing anything to encourage it. The reason to choose this one for a small space specifically, it's one of the few long-blooming perennials that never needs staking, never flops, and tolerates being slightly underwatered in a way most fine-textured plants can't. It's genuinely one of the easiest perennials sold anywhere, which is exactly why it's on this list. Plant 4, Blanket Flower. Gaillardia x grandiflora Arizona Sun is compact, reaching only about 10 to 12 inches tall, and it was specifically bred with pot production in mind, which is rare for a perennial. It's rated for USDA zones 3 through 9 and produces 3 to 4 inch daisy-like flowers in fiery red-orange with a yellow-tipped edge, blooming from June all the way into fall, often 4 to 5 months of continuous color if you deadhead it every week or two. What makes it stand out for containers is that it actively resents rich, heavily amended potting soil. It wants lean, fast-draining conditions, which means you can skip the expensive premium potting mix and just use something basic with extra perlite mixed in. It self-seeds modestly in the pot too, so don't be surprised if a second little seedling shows up at the base the following spring. If your patio gets brutal, unfiltered afternoon sun that fries everything else you've tried, this is the plant built for that exact spot. Quick one before plant 5. If any of these first 4 plants solved a spot you've been fighting with all summer, hit subscribe now, not at the end. The next 10 minutes only matter if you're still here for them, and the gardeners who subscribe partway through a video are consistently the ones who actually plant what they learned. Plant 5, Perennial Salvia. Salvia nemorosa caradonna is hardy in USDA zones 4 through 8 and brings something none of the first 4 plants offer: vertical structure in a small pot. Dark purple-black stems shoot up to about 2 feet, topped with dense spikes of violet-blue flowers that bloom from late spring into early summer, and then rebloom sporadically through the rest of summer into early fall if you cut the spent spikes back hard once the first flush fades. It's clump forming rather than a runner, so instead of spreading sideways, it thickens from the base, meaning the same plant gets visibly fuller and more floriferous every year without ever becoming unmanageable in a container. The reason it's here: hummingbirds and bees treat it like a landing strip. Hummingbirds and bees treat it like a landing strip, and it's one of the only true vertical accent perennials that's genuinely drought tolerant once established, so it doesn't punish you the one week you forget to water. Pair it with something trailing at the pot's edge, and you've got an instant thriller-filler combination without buying a single annual. Real quick, drop a comment telling me your zone. Not your city, your actual USDA zone. I read these. It tells me exactly which of these plants I should be pushing harder in future videos for people gardening where you are. Plant 6, Summer Snapdragon. Angelonia angustifolia is the plant to reach for if your containers sit somewhere that turns into an oven by July and nothing else survives it. It's a tender perennial in USDA zones 9 through 11, where it comes back reliably year after year, and it's grown as an annual everywhere colder. But even treated as an annual, it earns its spot here because of one specific trait. It is completely self-cleaning. The spent flowers drop on their own, no deadheading, ever, and it just keeps producing spikes of small snapdragon-like blooms in blue, purple, pink, or white from late spring straight through to the first frost. It actually performs better in heat and humidity than in mild weather, which makes it one of the few flowering plants that gets more floriferous exactly when your containers are struggling the most, mid-August, the point where most potted annuals are visibly exhausted. If you're in a warmer zone, treat this as a genuine perennial investment. If you're not, it's still worth planting right now, because a plant this heat-loving is only getting started this time of year. Plant 7, Dwarf Fall Aster. This is the plant that makes this entire video make sense for right now, this exact week. Symphyotrichum dumosum woods purple is hardy in USDA zones 4 through 8, and unlike almost everything else on this list, it hasn't even started its real show yet. It blooms from late summer into fall, meaning a plant you put in a container this week will be building toward its single best month, right as everything else in your garden or on your patio starts to fade. It stays compact, usually 12 to 18 inches, with a naturally dense, rounded habit that needs no pinching and no staking. And it's specifically been bred as a mildew-resistant, small-space alternative to florist mums. Except this one comes back every year instead of getting thrown out in November. The reason it's on this list: it's one of the last real nectar sources available to bees and migrating butterflies before the season ends, so a single pot on a balcony is doing actual ecological work in a month when very little else is flowering. Plant it now, water it in well, and let it build toward September. Plant 8, Trailing Lantana. Lantana montevidensis is a genuine perennial shrub in USDA zones 8 through 11, root hardy in warm winters and often blooming nearly year-round there, while in colder zones it's grown as a heat-loving annual that will outbloom nearly everything else in your containers from spring straight through frost. It grows as a low, cascading mat of small rosy lilac flowers with a yellow throat, and its trailing stems can stretch 2 to 3 feet, making it one of the most reliable spillers for a large pot or a railing planter. It genuinely does better in poor, sandy, slightly dry soil than in rich potting mix, and once established it shrugs off the kind of heat that wilts everything around it. One important note, and I'd be doing you a disservice not to mention it: lantana foliage and unripe berries are considered toxic if ingested, so if you've got a dog or cat that treats your containers like a snack bar, or small children who explore with their mouths, position this one out of reach or skip it. For everyone else, it is one of the single longest blooming plants you can put in a pot. Plant 9, Autumn Joy sedum. Hylotelephium autumn joy is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9 and is, without question, the plant built for the exact calendar moment we're in. Right now, in late July, it's a tidy mound of fleshy, upright gray-green foliage, unremarkable, patiently waiting. Starting in August, that changes fast. Broad, flattened flower clusters emerge as soft pink buds, deepen to rose red by September, and finish as a coppery bronze by October, all on the same plant. No swapping, no replanting. It's a true clump former, thickening at the base every year rather than running, so in a container it becomes a permanent, low-maintenance structural anchor. You build a structural your potter. You build the rest of your pot around. The reason it's essential for small space gardening specifically: you can leave the dried flower heads standing right through winter for texture and for the birds, and then in spring it resprouts from the same crown. No reseeding needed, no guesswork. Plant it this week and you'll be watching it change color for the next 12 weeks straight. If you've got a plant on this list you're already picturing on your own patio, tell me which one. And tell me what's currently in that spot: dead grass, an empty pot, something that didn't make it through July. I read every comment, and it genuinely shapes what I cover next. Plant 10, Creeping Jenny. Lysomachia nummularia, especially the golden aurea form, is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9 and is, hands down, one of the fastest filling spillers you can put in a container. It roots at every leaf node that touches soil, so in a hanging basket or a mixed pot it will cascade over the rim and keep extending all season, with small yellow flowers appearing in the leaf axils in summer as a bonus rather than the main event. This is really a foliage plant first. Here's the one thing I have to be straight with you about. In the ground, this plant is aggressive enough that several regions restrict or ban its sale outright because it escapes into wetlands and outcompetes native plants there. In a container, that risk mostly disappears as long as you keep the stems from touching the ground beneath the pot and rooting where they land. Treat it strictly as a contained spiller, never as a ground cover you plant directly in a garden bed. and it becomes one of the easiest, fastest, most rewarding trailing perennials available anywhere. Plant 11. Trailing Verbena. Verbena canadensis homestead purple is hardy as a true perennial in USDA zones 6 through 10, evergreen in the warmer end of that range, and it closes this list because it does almost everything the other 10 do combined, spreads fast, blooms forever, and asks for nothing. It grows low and wide, rooting along its creeping stems the way strawberries do, and produces rounded clusters of rich purple flowers, continuously from late spring all the way to the first hard frost. In a container, it will happily spill over the edge, while also thickening the surface of the pot from underneath, genuinely filling a 12-inch container within a single season from one starter plant. The reason it earns the closing spot: mildew-resistant glossy foliage, real drought tolerance once it's rooted in, and a bloom season that outlasts nearly every annual you could buy for the same price. If you only try one plant from this entire list, this is the one that gives you the most color for the least effort. So why does planting perennials in a pot still work right now, in the last days of July, when every gardening calendar online tells you the window closed months ago? Because containers don't play by the same rules as garden beds. In the ground, a perennial's roots are at the mercy of whatever soil temperature and moisture happen to exist that week, and a plant put in during a heat wave can genuinely struggle to establish before its energy gets split between rooting in and surviving. In a pot, you control both variables directly. You choose the soil. You choose exactly how much water it gets and when. You can move the whole container into afternoon shade for the first 10 days while roots settle in, then shift it into full sun once it's established, something you simply cannot do with anything planted in the ground. That's the entire advantage of container gardening. And it's why late July and August aren't a dead zone for potted perennials. They're just a slightly more hands-on window than April would have been. Every plant on this list is heat-tolerant by design. Several of them, the fall aster and the autumn joy sedum specifically, are only now approaching their actual peak season. You're not fighting the calendar here. For containers, you're barely behind it at all. Before you plant a single one of these, 3 things determine whether this actually works or turns into another dead pot by September. Rule 1. Drainage holes are non-negotiable, and a saucer full of standing water defeats the purpose of having them. Asterisk. Every plant on this list, without exception, is more likely to die from wet roots sitting in stagnant water than from underwatering. If your container doesn't have holes in the bottom, drill them or don't use it. If it sits on a saucer, empty that saucer after every rain and every deep watering. This single habit will save more of these plants than any amount of fertilizer ever will. Rule 2. Match the pot size to the plant's actual spread, not to how small it looks in the nursery container. A 4-inch pot of creeping jenny or trailing verbena looks like nothing on the shelf. Give it a container with real width, at least 12 to 14 inches across for the spreaders on this list, and it will fill that space by the end of the season. Undersize the pot and you'll be repotting in 6 weeks instead of enjoying a plant that fills in on its own. Rule 3. Container perennials need more feeding than the same plant in the ground because rain and soil nutrients can't reach them the same way. A slow-release balanced fertilizer mixed in at planting, topped off once mid-season, is enough for nearly every plant here. Skip this step and even the toughest sedum or salvia will bloom at half the volume it's actually capable of. That's 11 plants that spread fast, bloom for months instead of weeks, and genuinely thrive with almost nothing from you beyond a decent pot and a spot in the sun. Before you go, drop a comment with the one plant from this list going into a container of yours this week, and tell me your zone while you're at it. If this saved you from writing off the rest of your growing season, subscribe now, because next week's list goes just as deep. And the gardeners who show up today are the ones whose patios look completely different by the time September rolls around.